They call them the Philippines' walking dead. But here's the shocking truth. They are the most alive people you'll ever meet. Picture this, a baby born in the northern mountains of the Philippines takes her first breath. The midwife whispers a prayer, not for the child's health, but for her strength. Because this baby is Ilocano, and being Ilocano means one thing: you will suffer, but you will never break. But what nobody tells you about the Ilocanos is this: they didn't choose resilience. Resilience chose them. For centuries of colonial rule, natural disasters that would cripple nations, and a landscape so harsh it makes the Sahara look welcome. And this is where our story begins, in the year 1572. When Spanish conquistadors first set foot on Ilocano soil, they expected to find broken people. Instead, they found something that would haunt them for the next 300 years. The Spanish called it Tinatawagan in Kamatayan, the call of death. Every dawn, Ilocano farmers would venture into fields where the sun could literally kill you. Temperatures soaring past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Soil so salty, it poisoned crops before they could grow. But here's where it gets interesting. While other regions bent the knee to Spanish rule, the Ilocanos did something unprecedented. They smiled, nodded politely, and then quietly built an underground resistance that would span 3 centuries. Meet Diego Silang, a man whose name strikes fear into Spanish hearts even today. 1762, the British have invaded Manila. Spanish power is crumbling, and from the dusty town of Vigan emerges a figure that will change Philippine history forever. But what nobody tells you is that Diego Silang wasn't supposed to be a revolutionary. He was a messenger boy, a translator, someone the Spanish trusted completely, until the day he witnessed something that turned him into their greatest nightmare. Picture this scene: young Diego, barely 20, stands in a Spanish courthouse. Before him, an elderly Ilocano farmer kneels, hands bound. His crime? Growing rice on his own ancestral land without paying tribute to the colonial masters. The Spanish magistrate raises his whip. 1 strike. The old man doesn't flinch. 2 strikes. Still nothing. By the 10th strike, blood pools on the stone floor, but the farmer's eyes remain defiant. That's when Diego Silang realizes something profound: these people are not just resilient, they're unbreakable. And this is where everything changes. Within months, Diego transforms from a loyal Spanish translator into the leader of the most successful indigenous revolt in Philippine history. But here's the twist: he doesn't use violence. He uses something far more dangerous: unity. The Ilocanos have a word, bayanahan, but their version is different from the rest of the Philippines. When disaster strikes, they don't just help neighbors, they become each other. Entire communities share everything: food, shelter, even children. It's not charity, it's survival evolution. But here's the shocking part: the Spanish, with all their military might, couldn't defeat this. They tried dividing the community, failed. They tried buying off leaders, failed. They tried importing diseases. The Ilocanos built immunity. So they did something desperate, something so brutal, it's been erased from most history books. The Spanish declare what they call Operation Silencio, Operation Silence. The plan? Systematically starve the Ilocano provinces into submission, block all trade routes, burn all crops, let nature do what their armies could. For 18 months, the Ilocano regions receive nothing: no rice, no salt, no medicine. Spanish officials predict complete surrender within 6 months. They are wrong. The Ilocanos do something that defies all logic. They don't just survive, they thrive. How? They remember something their ancestors taught them, something that will become their greatest weapon against any oppressor. They eat the land itself: camote leaves, tree bark, roots that other cultures would consider poisonous. But the Ilocanos have been preparing for this moment for generations. Every grandmother has recipes for famine food. Every father knows which plants can sustain life when rice fails. But what nobody tells you is that this isn't just about food. It's about something deeper, something that will define the Ilocano spirit for centuries to come. When you're forced to find sustenance in what others call waste, you develop a superpower. You see opportunity where others see impossibility. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Diego Silang's revolution succeeds. For 8 months, the Ilocos provinces become the first truly independent Filipino territory. No Spanish rule, no colonial taxes, just Ilocanos, governing themselves with a system so efficient, it makes colonial bureaucracy look like amateur theatre. But here's the twist that changes everything. Success makes Diego Silang dangerous, not to the Spanish, but to other Filipino leaders who profit from colonial rule. May 28, 1763, Diego Silang sits in his headquarters in Vigan, planning the expansion of Ilocano independence to other provinces. Outside, thunder rolls across the mountains, nature's warning of what's coming. The assassin is Filipino, not Spanish, a man named Miguel Vicos, paid by wealthy Filipino collaborators who fear Diego's success will expose their own cowardice. One bullet through the back. Diego Silang falls, and with him, the dream of early Philippine independence died. But here's what nobody expected. Diego's death doesn't end the revolution, it transforms it into something far more dangerous. Enter Gabriela Silang. Picture this, a 23-year-old widow standing over her husband's grave. The Spanish expect her to grieve quietly, remarry, disappear into historical footnotes. Instead, she does something that sends shockwaves through the entire colonial empire. She picks up her husband's sword and declares something that still echoes through Ilocano culture today. Ang kamatayan ng isa ay hindi katapusan ng lahat. The death of one is not the end of all. Within days, Gabriela Silang assembles an army. But not just any army, an army of women, children, farmers, fishermen. People the Spanish had dismissed as harmless. People who had nothing left to lose. And this is where the story becomes legendary. For 4 months, Gabriela Silang's forces terrorize Spanish strongholds across northern Luzon. But she doesn't fight like other revolutionaries. She fights like an Ilocano woman, smart, relentless, and always 3 steps ahead. Her strategy? Hit the Spanish where it hurts most, their pride. She captures Spanish officials and forces them to work the same brutal labor they imposed on Ilocano. She redistributes Spanish wealth to Filipino families. She turns the colonial system upside down. But here's the shocking part. Gabriela Silang isn't just winning battles, she's creating a template for resistance that will inspire revolutionaries for centuries to come. Unfortunately, the Spanish learn from their mistakes with Diego. They don't try to face Gabriela in open battle. They do something far more insidious. They wait. September 1763. Gabriela's forces control most of northern Luzon. Victory seems inevitable. That's when the Spanish spring their trap, not with soldiers, but with traitors. Filipinos from other regions, jealous of Ilocano success, secretly coordinate with colonial forces. Gabriela Silang is betrayed, captured, and executed. But even in death, she delivers a final blow to Spanish authority. Her last words, spoken loud enough for hundreds to hear, "Ko'y magiging malaya, pero hindi dahil sa inyong kagalingan, dahil sa aming sakripisyo, you will be free, but not because of your greatness, because of our sacrifice." And this is where everything changes for the Ilocano people. The Spanish think they've broken the Ilocano spirit. They are wrong. They've just taught them something more valuable than any victory: how to hide their strength while appearing defeated. For the next 100 years, the Ilocanos perfect what they call pakbet na pakda, strategic invisibility. They pay their taxes with smile. They bow to Spanish official. They speak respectfully. But underneath this facade, they build something extraordinary: a parallel society. Underground schools teaching children to read, not in Spanish, but in Ilocano. Secret trade networks that bypass colonial taxes. Hidden granaries that ensure no Ilocano family starves while feeding Spanish tribute demands. What nobody tells you is that this underground system works so well, it becomes the template for Filipino resistance movements for the next 2 centuries. But here's where the story takes another shocking turn. The Philippine Revolution erupts across the islands. Jose Rizal becomes a martyr. Andres Bonifacio leads the Katipunan. The entire country rises against Spanish rule. Except the Ilocanos seem strangely quiet. Spanish officials congratulate themselves. Finally, they think, we've broken the most rebellious province in the Philippines. They are wrong. The Ilocanos aren't avoiding the revolution, they are preparing to win it. While other provinces fight the Spanish head-on, losing thousands of lives in direct confrontations, the Ilocanos do something brilliant. They quietly sabotage the colonial supply chain. Spanish armies need food. Somehow, all the rice shipments from northern Luzon get lost or spoiled. Spanish officials need transportation. Mysteriously, all the horses in Ilocos provinces develop diseases that prevent travel. Spanish reinforcements need guides through mountain passes. Every Ilocano suddenly develops amnesia about local geography. But here's the genius part. The Ilocanos do all this while maintaining perfect plausible deniability. They are not rebelling. They are just experiencing a series of unfortunate coincidences. And this is where we discover the true secret of Ilocano resilience. It's not about fighting harder than your enemy. It's about outlasting them, making resistance so costly, so frustrating, so psychologically exhausting that oppressors eventually give up and look for easier targets. The Spanish finally understand this in 1898, when American forces defeat them in the Spanish-American War. As colonial power transfers to the Americans, Spanish officials compile their final reports on the Philippine provinces. The report on the Ilocos region contains one haunting line: these people do not break. They bend, they hide, they wait, but they do not break. Any nation that tries to truly conquer them will find the cost unbearable. The Americans, unfortunately, don't read these reports carefully enough. The Philippine-American War begins. American forces, fresh from their victory over Spain, expect quick submission from Filipino provinces. Most regions comply after initial resistance, but not the Ilocano. And this is where the Americans learn the same painful lesson the Spanish learned 150 years earlier. You can't defeat people who treat survival as an art form. General Arthur MacArthur, yes, that MacArthur family, leads American forces into Ilocos Norte, expecting a standard military campaign. Instead, he encounters something that drives him to the edge of madness. The Ilocanos don't fight the Americans in traditional battles. They simply make American occupation impossible. American soldiers wake up to find their weapons mysteriously jammed with sand, their food supplies spoiled overnight, their communication lines cut in ways that suggest intimate knowledge of military system. Their local guides constantly lead them in circles through mountain terrain that all looks identical. But here's what truly frustrates the Americans. Every Ilocano they meet is polite, helpful, seemingly loyal. Yet somehow, American control over the region remains purely theoretic. General MacArthur writes to Washington, "We control every town during daylight hours. By nightfall, we control nothing. These people have weaponized their own landscape against us." What he doesn't understand is that the Ilocanos aren't using the landscape as a weapon, they are the landscape. For centuries of surviving in harsh terrain have turned them into human extensions of the mountains, the rivers, the rice fields. And this is where we discover something profound about resilience itself. True resilience isn't about bouncing back from adversity. It's about absorbing adversity so completely that you become stronger than whatever tried to break you. The Americans eventually give up trying to truly pacify the Ilocos region. Like the Spanish before them, they settle for symbolic control while the Ilocanos maintain actual autonomy through their parallel systems. But here's where the story takes its most unexpected turn. World War II arrives in the Philippines. Japanese forces invade with unprecedented brutality. This time, the Ilocanos face an enemy different from any before, an enemy that doesn't just want submission, but complete cultural destruction. The Japanese strategy is simple: break Filipino spirit by destroying Filipino identity. Burn books written in local languages. Execute teachers who refuse to teach only Japanese propaganda. Turn Filipinos against each other through systematic starvation and terror. Most provinces crumble under this assault. Historical records from this period describe mass psychological breakdown, collaboration with occupiers, the collapse of community bonds. But in the Ilocos provinces, something different happens. The Japanese discover that the Ilocanos have been preparing for this exact scenario for 400 years. Those underground schools the Spanish couldn't find, they've evolved into invisible networks that can keep Ilocano culture alive even under total occupation. Those secret trade systems, they've grown sophisticated enough to sustain entire communities without any official economy. That strategic invisibility perfected under Spanish rule. It's now advanced enough to make Japanese occupiers question whether they are actually in control of anything meaningful. But here's the shocking part. The Ilocanos don't just survive Japanese occupation, they save other Filipinos who thought Ilocano methods were too passive, too slow, too subtle. Refugees from Luzon's more direct resistance movements flee north to Ilocos provinces, expecting to find broken, collaborationist community. Instead, they find the most effective resistance network in the entire country. And this is where we understand the true genius of the Ilocano approach to adversity. While other communities spent centuries learning how to fight oppressors, the Ilocanos spent centuries learning how to make oppression impossible to sustain. Japanese officials find themselves controlling territory that produces nothing useful, populated by people who comply with every order while somehow making those orders meaningless. Want Ilocanos to report for forced labor? They show up, sick, weak, unable to work effective. Want them to surrender local guerrilla fighters? They provide names of people who died years earlier or never existed. Want them to grow food for Japanese forces? They plant crops that mysteriously fail just before harvest season. The Japanese realize they are fighting something more dangerous than armed rebellion. They are fighting a people who have turned survival into a form of warfare. The war ends. American forces return to find the Ilocos provinces in remarkable condition compared to the rest of the Philippines. Infrastructure intact, communities functional, culture preserved. American commanders are baffled. How did the region that suffered the longest occupation emerge the strongest? The answer lies in something the Ilocanos learned centuries ago. Resilience isn't about avoiding damage, it's about healing faster than your enemies can hurt you. And this is where our story moves from the past into the present. Because everything we've learned about Ilocano resilience throughout history explains something remarkable happening in the modern Philippines. Today, Ilocanos make up less than 10% of the Philippine population. Yet they dominate industries requiring extreme resilience, overseas work, disaster response, long-term infrastructure projects, politics. Walk through any major city in the world with a Filipino community: Dubai, Hong Kong, New York, London, And you'll find Ilocanos not just surviving, but building systems that help other Filipinos thrive. But what nobody tells you is why this happens. It's not because Ilocanos are naturally harder working than other Filipinos. It's because 4 centuries of imposed hardship taught them something other cultures learned too late: how to find opportunity in scarcity, strength in isolation, hope in hopelessness. Modern Ilocanos carry genetic memories of ancestors who ate tree bark and called it nourishment, who smiled at oppressors while building parallel societies, who turned cultural invisibility into a superpower. When an Ilocano migrant worker in Dubai faces exploitation, they don't just endure it, they quietly build networks that protect future migrants. When Ilocano communities in America face discrimination, they don't just overcome it, they create systems that elevate entire Filipino population. And this is where we discover something profound about human potential itself. What if resilience isn't just about surviving hardship? What if it's about transforming hardship into wisdom, then sharing that wisdom to make others stronger? The Ilocano story suggests something revolutionary: that the communities which suffer most intelligently become humanity's greatest resources for solving suffering. Climate change. Ilocanos have centuries of experience adapting to environmental extreme. Economic inequality. They've built parallel economies under the noses of oppressive systems for 400 years. Cultural preservation under globalization. They've maintained distinct identity while appearing to assimilate to dominant cultures since the Spanish arrived. But here's what makes the Ilocano story truly extraordinary. They've done all of this without losing their humanity. Visit an Ilocano community today, whether in Vigan, Queens, Dubai, or Vancouver, and you'll find something remarkable. Despite centuries of reasons to become bitter, cynical, or closed off, Ilocanos remain remarkably generous, optimistic, and welcoming to outsiders. They've learned the ultimate lesson about resilience: that surviving hardship means nothing if you become hard in the process. And this is where our story reaches its most important revelation. The Ilocanos represent something every human community needs to understand as we face an uncertain future: that true strength comes not from avoiding adversity, but from developing the wisdom to transform adversity into advantage. Every challenge they faced, colonial oppression, environmental extremes, economic scarcity, cultural suppression, became a classroom that taught them skills other communities never developed. Spanish rule taught them strategic patience and invisible resistance. Harsh landscapes taught them to find sustenance in scarcity. Multiple occupations taught them to build parallel systems. Modern globalization taught them to succeed in any environment while maintaining their core identity. But here's the final twist that makes this story unforgettable. The Ilocanos don't see themselves as extraordinary. Ask any Ilocano about their people's remarkable resilience, and they'll typically respond with something like, "We just do what we have to do." That humility isn't false modesty, it's wisdom. They understand that resilience isn't a superpower, it's a choice you make every day when faced with circumstances you cannot control. And this brings us to the real reason their story matters today. We live in an age when entire populations face the kinds of systematic challenges that once seemed unique to places like colonial Philippines. Climate disasters that displace millions, economic systems that create artificial scarcity, political movements that demand cultural suppressions, technological changes that threaten traditional ways of life. The Ilocano story offers something more valuable than inspiration. It offers a proven methodology for not just surviving these challenges, but using them to build stronger community. Their approach is surprisingly simple: when you can't control your circumstances, focus completely on controlling your response. When you can't fight your enemies directly, make their success so costly they eventually choose easier targets. When you can't preserve your culture through dominance, preserve it through adaptive invisibility. When you can't help yourself through individual action, build collective systems that help everyone. Most importantly, when facing impossible odds, remember that impossible only means no one has figured out how to do it yet. And this is why the Ilocano story isn't just Philippine history, it's human instruction manual for the 21st century. Because if a people can transform the world's harshest challenges into sources of strength for 4 centuries, while maintaining their humanity and helping others along the way, then maybe the rest of us can learn to do the same. The Spanish called them indios, and expected submission. The Americans called them insurgents, and expected defeat. The Japanese called them subjects, and expected compliance. History calls them survivors, but that's not the complete truth either. The complete truth is this: the Ilocanos didn't just survive history's worst challenges, they absorbed those challenges and became stronger, wiser, more compassionate because of them. And in a world that seems to grow harsher every day, maybe that's exactly the kind of people we all need to learn to become. They say the Philippines' most resilient people are the Ilocano. But here's what nobody tells you: resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose, every single day, when everything around you says it's easier to give up. The Ilocanos chose different for 400 years. And that choice made all the difference, not just for them, for all of us who are still learning what